Let's talk about a really powerful idea today. That history, well, it isn't just what happened. It's a story. And like any story, someone gets to decide who the main characters are and who gets left in the shadows.
So here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll kind of poke holes in the whole idea of a complete history. Then we'll get into this fascinating concept called unwriting. After that, we'll look at some real-world examples to see how it works, break down the how and why it happens, and then wrap it all up by talking about why this matters so much for how we see the world today.
All right, let's dive right in and start with the big one, the belief that kind of holds up everything we think we know about the past. Just think about that for a second. Is history what actually happened? Or is it just the story that got picked to be told? I mean, we tend to think of history as the solid, undeniable record, right? But what if it's more like a movie that's been through a ton of editing? A story where some voices are cranked all the way up, and others, they're just completely muted. That's really the puzzle we're trying to solve here.
So to really get our heads around this idea of selective storytelling, we're going to borrow a really cool concept from an author named Michael K. Bender. He's got a specific name for this process.
Okay, unwriting history. This isn't just about things getting lost over time or people forgetting stuff. No, it's an active process. It's about choices, sometimes conscious, sometimes not, to completely leave out certain perspectives, to silence certain stories. It's almost like history being written with a built-in eraser. And this quote really nails it. The official story, the one you read in textbooks, it's not neutral, not at all. It's usually there to prop up the people already in power. Think about it. By deciding what counts as real evidence, the historical record can end up just reinforcing the very power structures that created it. It becomes this endless loop. But this all sounds a bit abstract, right? So what does this unwriting actually look like on the ground? Let's get into some specific examples where you can really see these historical shadows.
Yeah, Bender doesn't just throw this theory out there and leave it. In his collection Series of Shadows, he's almost like a detective. He shows us exactly where to look for the holes in the official narrative, and, maybe more importantly, how to ask why those holes are there to begin with. And he really zooms in on a few key areas where this unwriting happens all the time. Just imagine all the vast indigenous histories, passed down through oral traditions for generations that were just brushed aside because they weren't written in some colonial logbook. Or think about all the innovators, the brilliant minds whose contributions were just ignored because they didn't fit the popular image of a genius at the time. And then there's the big one, the appropriation of ideas, where credit just magically shifts from the person who actually had the idea to someone with more influence.
Okay, so that naturally leads to the next big question. How does this even happen? What are the actual mechanics here? How does one story get the green light while another one gets totally silenced?
And this is where you can see the bias just baked right into the system. Look at the left side. You've got what we're taught is hard evidence, official state archives, legal documents, things written down in a very specific, very Western way. But then on the other side, you've got everything that's often dismissed as soft or unreliable, oral traditions, ceremonies, storytelling. But these are incredibly valid ways of preserving knowledge. The problem is they just don't fit the mold. The system itself is set up to value one type of story way more than the other. So if the traditional tools are biased, how do you find what's been unwritten? Well, Bender argues you can't just be a typical historian. You need a much bigger toolkit. You've got to bring together the rigor of science and law, sure, but you also have to embrace the cultural richness of storytelling and ceremony. It's only by looking through all of these different lenses at once that you can finally start to see the whole picture and the power structures that have been hiding in plain sight. Okay, so this is a really fascinating idea for, history buffs. But what does it actually mean for us, for you and me, right here, right now? And this is probably the most important part. Understanding unwriting isn't just a history lesson. It is a powerful tool for thinking critically about the present. Once you start using this framework, you'll see it everywhere. You'll start listening to the news, to political speeches, even stories in your own community, and you'll find yourself asking, whose story is this, really? Who benefits from me hearing it this way? And the biggest question of all, what or who is being left out? So if you remember anything from this, let it be these three things. 1, history isn't just found, it's built, it's constructed. 2, power structures are basically the editors. They decide which stories get told and saved. And 3, the best thing we can do is learn to question the main story, to always be looking for what's missing.
And that brings us to one last question, one for you to take with you. Just look around at your own town, your country, maybe even your own family. What are the big stories you've always been told? And now think, what other histories, what other voices might have been pushed aside to make room for them? Because looking for those answers, well, that's where the real story truly begins.